Thank you, Jason. So I am Terrell Russell. Hi, you've probably gotten an email from me at least once if you're in this room. I'm currently serving as interim chief technologist for the consortium. I've been doing this for a couple years now, as Jason has risen through the ranks of being in charge of things, wearing his fancy coat. It is my role here today, this morning, to talk about the technology itself. Now that you've given up your opportunity to ask about the consortium, now you can ask about what we're doing with the technology. So in the last year, at this point last year, we had 4.1.8 was out. That was the latest release. And we did a big talk and show about what was coming in 4.2, and we were very excited about it. Our training last year was on what would become 4.2. So we demonstrated the fancy rule engine stuff and did the demos, and then we finally released it in November, which was not in June. That would be the 275 issues closed, getting through there. So 4.2 was a very big deal for us because we changed everything under the covers. The build system, the compilers, the libraries that we included. It was a very big lift, and turns out those things take longer than you always expect they do. And it turns out that people are actually using iRODS with 4.1, so there was a small matter of closing another 50, 60, 70 things for things that were in the wild. And those always jump to the top of the list when somebody finds something that's broken in their deployment. So by the time we got to November, we released 4.2.0 from the stage at Supercomputing to grand applause and balloons and confetti, or at least 5 or 6 people clapping. That's probably more the case. There's a video. You can watch it. 4.2.1, we are very pleased to announce that that is out as of, what day was that? Thursday, Friday, last week? You have to ship the software that you're going to demo the next week. So all of the training that was done yesterday was on 4.2.1 because, it had to be finished. The reason that 4.1.11 is not out is because it turned out to be hard. So 4.2.1 had 34 issues plus the 36 that we've already closed for 4.1.11. 4.1.11 will come out, as always, as soon as possible, right? But we have, I think, another 15 or 20 remaining for 4.1.11 that have been identified. We hope not to have a 4.1.12. Spanning 2 different build systems is a significant hurdle and does slow us down. So we will release a 4.1.12 if someone finds something that is a blocker for them on 4.1 stable. But at this point, we don't have any reason to think that there should be a 12. 4.1 has been out for, I guess it's now 2 years. 4.1.0 was released 2 years ago, and that is basically the arrangement that we have with the community. 2 years is a pretty solid support schedule. But again, if there is something that is a blocker for you or something that is holding up your deployment in 4.1, we will continue to support that for you guys if that's something that you need. We are encouraging going to 4.2. There is a significant amount of work put into every release, and it will only go forward. It will be better than it was before. We also released, as of Friday or Thursday, whenever that was, I've not slept much, the Python rule engine plugin. We demonstrated this yesterday at the training sessions. I think most of you were there. And it does work as advertised, which is glorious. This is a big deal for us because it allows developers who do not know or want to know the iRODS rule language to be able to write their rules and their policy for their organization in Python. So the plugin itself is in C++, like all of our plugins, but through the magic and mystery of Boost Python, we are supporting being able to write and develop rules in the Python rule language. It is currently using the 2.7 interpreter. So if you're a fancy person using Python 3, I apologize, we're not quite there yet. I think it does work, but we're not going to claim that it works. in public. You can ask questions about any of these at any time. Someone will probably have to find you with a microphone. The Python iRODS client is a client library in Python. This is the first time that we have actually issued a release. This is a piece of software that existed for the last 3 or 4 years. It was originally developed by Cyverse, formerly known as iPlant. It's a large NSF-funded project in Tucson, Arizona, or at least headquartered there. It's a national project in the US. They had developed this client to do their own work, and we found it quite useful, and it turns out that the back end of what Cyverse was doing had moved on a little bit beyond Python. They started doing things in crazy languages like Clojure. And so we picked up the baton and started running with the Python and moved it forward significantly, and then in the last, I guess, month and a half, we formally have taken the stick from them and have released, I think it's 0.6.0 in classic Python numbering. It'll never be 1.0 maybe, we'll see. But it now supports a great number of things in the API. So if there is something that you would like to see and you're writing your own clients in Python, it's much quicker, very quick to add new support for things that are already in our API. We do not have parity across all of our client libraries. It's something that we're working towards. We've heard that from people. But right now, I would say that's getting the most active development in terms of new features and support. And then the cloud browser, if you're not familiar with this is the web-based client that we are providing alongside Rincy and the DFC project. And it's an iRODS client that is a web application. So you log into a web application running on a web server. It is passing your credentials along to an iRODS server. Those could be on the same machine. They don't have to be. Like all of the things that we do, you have to put on your distributed hat and get confused at least twice, and then you start to understand how it works. But we have done a significant number of upgrades and releases, and all of these things are in testing. They don't get on the screen unless they have tests behind them in our continuous integration. Are there any questions about what we have done before I go to what we are doing and what we will be doing? No. Your opportunities are slipping by. So we have many sticks in the fire, and this list is always longer than I expect it to be when I start making this list. I think it's going to be 5 or 6, and then it turns into 7 or 8 or 9. So obviously, at the top of the list here, we're still working on the iRODS, the Python client. It's moving. We have started work on a Python ingest tool. We have heard from a great number of community members and, we'll call them potential community members, people who have all the dollars, and we would like to take some of them from them. They have a lot of data at rest already. They have a very bold infrastructure and a vision, and they've already got people who have opinions, and they're doing stuff already, and they want to add some iRODS to that. They really don't want to buy a lot of new storage. They don't want to move their data. It's expensive. It takes time. It's full of dark holes where you can lose things. So what they would like to do is ingest their data into an iRODS system, play with it a little bit, figure out that they can trust it before it starts to take over their infrastructure, right? So the ingest tool, the idea is that it has a robust mechanism for starting and stopping, doing checksums, making sure that everything is good and clean, all the nice things, right? That's what we talk about, the future being iRODS with all the nice things. We haven't given it a name yet. We can have naming competition at the end of the day, maybe, for all these things. The next bullet, Jason mentioned this a little bit, the Lustre Integration tool. Obviously doesn't have a name yet either. I'll have to come up with something fun. The idea right now is that we have proof of concept code that will allow us to basically become a client to the Lustre metadata server. So if this is something that is of interest to you, please contact us. Please come and be in the room with us, on the phone with us, have conversations. We have 2 pieces of software. One is a plugin for iRODS, and the other is a connector. On one side, it speaks the LCAPD protocol, which is a piece of software that basically turns the Lustre changelog into a message queue. So on one side of the connector, we speak to this message queue, and on the other side, we speak the iRODS protocol. And so the idea is that when changes occur in Lustre at speed, which is the only way anything happens in Lustre, in an asynchronous manner, the iRODS catalog can be updated of changes that happened in the Lustre parallel file system. This is a very big deal because now we don't have to be in the way of their very fast and very fancy networking and people and expertise, right? We're out of the way, but we still get the updates, which allows policy to be fired across the rest of the data management infrastructure that's already been set up. So it allows us spanning into these parallel file systems without getting in the way, but still allowing all the power and control and feature set that we provide on top of everything else. It's very exciting. We're not there yet. We have a Query Arrow database plugin that is in, we may call it the final throes of development here. I think the last 2 years at the user group meeting, Hao Zhu, our local wizard, has been putting math on the screen and talking about how the future is glorious. The idea is that we will be able to abstract metadata in the same way that we have abstracted storage. We will be able to query multiple different database backends for the truth of what iRODS has and what you would like to query against. Right now, that lives in a relational database on one machine or in one cluster that you're in charge of. The idea behind Query Arrow is that you will be able to issue a query that gets automagically, it's a technical term, divided up and goes to whatever database store that's holding the information, and then stitching those results back together with new fancy math and presenting it as a regular table that would have come out of a singular database. So this is a big deal. This is cutting edge math and science and some set theory or something like that. I don't know. Hal will talk to us about that later today, I think. That's coming. We have Multipart Transfer, which Jason alluded to. He's been working on the V5 API. We are currently working on the V5 API, and by V5 I mean iRODS version 5. So we're doing this as a set of V4 plugins. Because our API is itself pluggable, we can experiment in this way without having to change anything in the 4 core. So we can actually experiment, play with, learn, watch it fall over, change it, update it, and have a V5 API basically in a V4 wrapper. Once we're happy with it and other things happen, when we're ready to release version 5 of iRODS, we'll already have what the API will look like. And you guys will not be surprised and horrified and scared of all the changes that we've made because you'll be able to see it ahead of time and it won't be our fault. It'll be your fault. So Multipart Transfer is the first thing that we're doing through this V5 API that we're experimentally rolling out and playing with. The idea behind the Multipart Transfer is that we will be able to chop up files, ship them over the wire, stitch them back together on the other side, which allows very graceful restart because every one of those pieces will be checksummed by iRODS. Right now, with the current parallel transfer protocol that we have in place, if a file goes some of the way and the network drops out or somebody hits Control-C accidentally or something like that, unless you use the right incantations at the beginning, your restart will actually be a true restart. And you may have lost 10, 20, 50, 80% of your transfer and you have to start over again. With this, because we're doing checksums along every piece, it'll know exactly where, because it's in the catalog already, what's already been transferred successfully, and just pick up and run with the things that still need to be moved. Again, if any of this is interesting, this is news to you, come have a conversation. We want to make sure we do this the best way with whatever your use cases already are. Again, we have the cloud browser that we're working on. The next little release, I think, is going to have some more sharing ACL capabilities and some paging. It turns out that if you pointed at a collection that has hundreds of thousands of things in it, it didn't do any paging, so you're going to get all of them and then it's going to stop working. So we're going to fix that. And then there's a future work where we're going to be able to turn Cloud Browser perhaps into something else. We may give it a new name. It may merge with another project. We're still working that out. Metadata templates, we have done a lot of work with the community. We've heard a lot of different use cases around how people want to structure and enforce the metadata that's in their system. It turns out that your discovery mechanisms are not very good if your metadata is not very good. So how can you put some blockers on the front door, as well as some gentle encouragement on the back for your scientists to fill out the forms before you go and issue something, a DOI, or before it goes to the publishing system. So this allows a very flexible way for the administrators to define what metadata must or should or can kind of be in your system, what it should look like, what those different schemas should be. And it's a many-to-many relationship, which is nice because you may not want Dublin Core everywhere, but you may want it some of the places, but you also may want some custom schema in addition to that for some of your projects. And the last thing up here is the Swagger REST API. So we are working hard with Mike, and Mike's going to talk after I do in a few minutes and talk more about that a little bit. The idea is that we are going through the Swagger process, which is it's basically a framework for defining an API. And we're going to do that in an open way, describe it in the standard, whereby from that standard it's very easy to use existing tooling to produce kind of skeleton libraries for lots and lots of different clients. So this is the way that we're going to be defining the native, which isn't out yet, native iRODS REST API. Right now, iRODS lives on port 1247 by default. Wouldn't it be nice with a little plugin to also have a port 80 listener that can handle all the things that iRODS does? Yes? The version 5 API is really about changing the iRODS protocol itself. The REST layer on top of that would be a translation into, or kind of an overlay on top of those same types of functionality. So it's a different door into the same functionality. The V5 API will not be a REST API. The V5 API is defining the protocol that's either on the wire in terms of encoding, the packets and all that kind of stuff, right? So right now it's a very custom, aged protocol. We have made a commitment with version 4, 4.2, 4.3, 4.4, whatever comes out in 4, will be API compatible with 3. And the reason for that is to support federation with existing 3 deployments. As soon as we change the protocol with 5, we won't be able to talk to 3 anymore. So we're going through this very structured process in public because we don't want to surprise anybody and not be able to have them upgrade or federate with somebody that they've already got a working relationship with. But yes, 5 will not be able to talk to 3, so we want to go through that process together. Okay. So highlights in the version 5 API are mostly going to be around standardizing the network protocols. I think we have decided at this point to, is it protocol buffers? Are we going to go protobuf, or have we decided to use, I'm going to give you a microphone, Jason. Did you steal a microphone? Oh, who stole the microphone?
Sure. Oh, okay. Yes. On the camera, of course. So the V5 API is still very much a work in progress. As Terrell said, we have an adapter back to version 4. We have, I would not use the word standardized at this point because this is still very much a work in progress, but we have built what we have right now around 0MQ and Avro. So rather than working with the native packing instructions, which can only very much work at speed with the C++ API, we've moved to Avro for serialization. We may run tests with Captain Proto at this point, as its language support has broadened considerably. And the idea there is that with the 0MQ topologies, we can build considerably more interesting use cases, such as messaging coming in and fanning out. So if you have a put in a multi-part context, it can be fanned out to multiple servers at once, rather than having all of that go to a single server. We can also then, conversely stream all of that data back from multiple servers simultaneously. So this gives us a much more interesting way of routing data in general. Also, if you are working in a DMZ scenario, you can have a V5 API protocol route the data through the DMZ. So that is a decision that can be made at runtime based on the topology of your servers as well as the servers to which you're connected or that are making the requests. And so this gives us a much more flexible way of talking about how data is moved. And this is going to be true for all of the APIs within version 5. And the idea there is that we have put a significant burden on the client developers who have to support all of these protocols as well as manage a lot of communication back and forth with iRODS at this point. If you recursively copy a collection or you recursively, replicate a collection, that is actually managed on the client side. So we're going to move all of that burden back into the server so we can manage that from server to server rather than having the client negotiate each one of those replicas. Does that make sense? Okay. Any more questions?
Yeah, so the client development and the network protocols are the two primary motivators for changing anything. That's what we want. We want to make it easier for you guys to build things at speed and use standard networking things with libraries that we don't write so that they get better at the speed of whatever Google is doing or whatever Facebook does, right? Like these things are moving very quickly, and we would like to tap into that speed of development as well as whatever speed they do, with the networking. Is that good? So the iRODS client that came from Nestle has not been released by us yet. It has been accepted by the consortium. It has gone through the acceptance criteria that we laid out, which includes, like Jason said, some business goals, some justification from a development perspective, why it makes sense for us to have it rather than for them to have it, the maintenance burden, that kind of thing. But we have not yet released it. It has passed all of our tests, but we have never released an R package before, and we want to do it the right way. And it turns out there's a whole community that have opinions about that kind of thing. So I'm learning all of those things. We have to go touch all the things in the right place on the internet, and then hit a button, and then supposedly magic happens. I haven't figured out where all the buttons are yet. The AMQP Audit Rule Engine plugin, we demoed this last year. Excuse me. And like the other things that didn't happen in June and almost got released in November, the AMQP Audit Rule Engine plugin is a mouthful, but also its goal is to allow you to emit an AMQP message onto a standardized message bus, again, a technology that we are not in charge of and that moves at speed, for every policy enforcement point in the entire system, if you would like that. That may be too much. You can configure exactly which messages get pushed out to the network based on a regular expression. So you can dial it down and only do the thing. Maybe you only care about the PEPs after a file gets put. Or maybe you're doing really intense logging of your authentication mechanism because that's important to you for some reason. Maybe every time a file is closed, you need to trigger something else, and you need to keep a pretty strong log of when that happens. Maybe you're interested in database performance, and you want to look at how many queries are going over the wire and saying, what are you guys doing? This is clown shoes. I have some strong opinions about what you're doing with the database. Let me help. This will give you the numbers to be able to support that argument. So that's going to be coming out as soon. Well, I guess the code is basically ready, and it's passing the test. I just have to sleep a little bit more and get home and push some more buttons. But I don't think there's any more development to be done around that unless you find a bug in the next few days. 4.1.11 I talked about a little bit earlier. Right now, I think there are 10 or 20 open issues for 4.1.11. Shouldn't be too far away. We tried to get it out before the user group meeting, and it didn't happen. Priorities turn out to be important when you're running out of time. 4.2.2, I think we have, I'm not sure how many are in there already. Things that didn't make it into 4.2.1, so we kicked a few things off the list and bumped them to 4.2.2. Nothing that was critical for our training got bumped because we had to have it for this week. And then 4.3 are things that right now, the main thrust of 4.3 will be overhauling our logging mechanism. It has been a custom situation since the beginning of time, and we would like to move to some best practices around, again, other people's libraries for how to do this well. So we've looked into 3 or 4 different header-only C++ libraries that do logging and are very flexible. Again, if you have opinions about your favorite or would like to see something done in a particular way, please show up and have that conversation. I think I'm very interested in the structured logging phenomenon and writing things down in key value pairs when necessary, especially in terms of a kind of an error stack, because it allows you to use other tools to parse your logs and do something very interesting with it. Right now we have a mishmash of whatever we decided to write to the log file at the time, which makes it hard to write other tools that work with those logs. 4.2 logs are significantly quieter than 4.1. You now only see things basically when you write something to the log or when an error occurs. We don't have that kind of heartbeat stuff that happened where your logs would get larger and larger just because your iRODS was running. We want to overhaul a lot of that for 4.3 and make it much more standardized. That's really the only major thrust for 4.3, I think. We don't want to do too much because we still have a lot of work to do. And as a nice effect, the core doesn't have to move as much anymore. We may pull out the transfer mechanism as an 8th plugin. That may not make it into 4.3. That may not make it into 4.4. Maybe that's for 5. We're not sure yet. But for the most part, we just want to have these things get harder and hardened and more hardened, and not scare you guys with big changes anymore. We've done a lot of that in the last year, so we're going to let it ride for a little bit. So the next few slides are the same as what I presented last year, but a lot of you were not in the room, so I will go over this again. This is really kind of backing up and talking about the big picture of where we see the next little bit of work going. So 4.2 is and was about sending things out. We have these dynamic policy enforcement points. You did some of the training yesterday. You manipulated the PEPs and were able to affect certain behaviors and routing and all kinds of magic things, right? So the fact that these PEPs are now dynamic, including all the static policy enforcement points, is a very big deal and allows you to do very targeted policy work. Basically, any operation in the system has a pre and post hook, and you can write code for every one of them if you want. Just by typing ILS, you're actually hitting over 1,200 policy enforcement points. If you're using the Audit plugin and you printed all those out, you would have a nice list of 1,200 things that happened when you typed ILS. The pluggable rule engine affords being able to run that Audit plugin, as well as writing rules in other languages. And of course, this enterprise messaging support, meaning now we're tying into these standards that allow you to do other things in your network that probably already exist, including monitoring, including dashboarding of certain activities, load balancing, all that kind of stuff. We will now play well with others, much more so than with 4.1. So that was about sending messages out from iRODS. 4.3 is really about being able to talk to the infrastructure where you send all those messages. And that's going to be facilitated by GenQuery version 2. So the general query is the interface, the safety layer that iRODS provides to allow you to do queries against a database. It's not the raw SQL, because then you might break something and that would not be good. So we allow this general query interface to support the things that we want to support and does the joinery for you and everything. But it has some limitations. So GenQuery version 2 is about going out and touching these external data sources and bringing them back and making them available to the conditional logic in your rule base. You will now be able to make policy and make decisions on metadata that lives in other places. So the current GenQuery, we have iRODS, it goes through GenQuery, it talks to SQL. We provide 3 different plugins for the flavor of SQL that you want, but it's still SQL, right? In the glorious future, iRODS will go through GenQuery v2, aka Query Arrow, right? You'll be able to talk to SQL. You might also be able to talk to GraphDB or Mongo or Elasticsearch or any other data store that you might want, including public data sources like PubMed or something like that. They have a query interface. You can write a plugin for Query Arrow. iRODS can use that and support queries into these different arrays of things. The magic occurs when your query gets split up to go to multiple places and joining across databases. And then the results get stitched back together and they come back as a single transactional unit. It's mystical. I can't answer your questions about that. You'll have to ask how. So the goal with 4.2 was really about pushing those messages out, as well as pushing things over to compute, as well as pushing things out to indexing, right? It's about spreading the arms and getting the information out of iRODS. iRODS was the place where everything lived, but we've heard and we believe that that does slow things down after a while, especially at scale, right? This allows you to push that information out to the right place, whatever the right place is in your infrastructure. This messaging bus gets us out of the way of being slow. 4.3 is about putting our arms around that and being able to query it and make decisions about it. So through some plugins of a variety of flavors, we'll be able to query anything that's in that compute store, that triple store, that indexing system. Elasticsearch can have a full text index of what everything that's in iRODS. And now we'll be able to just say, hey, can you run a query against this? Thanks. And present that to the user of iRODS. They never know, they don't need to know that we're running it through Elasticsearch. They just see magical text search available now. Please don't tell me you're doing full text search currently in iRODS, because that'll slow things down tremendously. That's not what we do, right? We have metadata, we have targeted queries. It's not full text. So this is the fun slide. So once your organization is in one of these circles, and you've got this glorious future of having your metadata in different places based on the proper technology and the most efficient place where it lives, and you can wrap your arms around it, well, guess what? Now you can federate with somebody else doing the same thing, and they have their own expertise. They have their own data stores. They have their own right answers. Well, through federation, you can actually query their stuff, excuse me. You can query their databases, their expertise, and stitch it back with some of your own. You can actually run queries across federation and get the answers back in one piece. I have no idea how fast this is going to be, which is the same thing as saying I don't know how slow this will be. We'll figure it out. So this is my last slide. This gives Mike about 20 minutes. So we've got the things that we do and how we do it, right? So I'm in charge of the technology working group. This is a monthly meeting where people stand up and yell at me and tell me what you want. And then we write it down and I say no to a lot of things. Not really, but it's a prioritization exercise, right? We figure out what's important, what the roadmap looks like, what people are working on at the moment, and how we can help you. We've got 3 other working groups that are in various stages of progress and completeness. Jason mentioned the metadata templates, the file system integration, and the MIME types. I don't know where they're going to go. We're going to keep working on them, and it basically depends on the speed of who shows up and how much you care. The best way right now to interact with us is creating GitHub issues. You don't have to do that if you don't want to. You can just have conversations, and we'll turn them into issues if we find something. Obviously, we love for you to write code too. That's glorious. The chat list is where people are having the conversation and sharing their best practices. And then, of course, we love plugging consortium membership, right? Please join us and help this exist tomorrow. That's how this works, and that's why we work on this. Are there any questions about all of those things I just said? Yes. Do we have a microphone in the audience? Who stole my microphone? You go ahead. I'll repeat the question. I'll repeat the question if I can hear you. Yes. Okay. So yes, so the question is about Query Arrow or jQuery v2, and whether we can also issue queries to Solr in addition to Elasticsearch or other technologies. Yes, the point of the Query Arrow engine is to provide an abstraction for going from one query language to another. So with a Query Arrow plugin, a QAP, that is the shim, that is the conversion from the thing on the left to the thing on the right. And so your Query Arrow installation could have one plugin, or 2, or 5, or 10, depending on what it is that you wanted to speak with on the right side. And then it's a matter of configuring that plugin, and then of course configuring the connection to that place that you want to connect to. But we will have a demo of that, I think, later today. I think that's at 4 o'clock maybe, if your fancy schedule says how zoo. But the answer is yes. The idea is that you will be able to convert from any query language to another query language. That is the point of the software. So until it's released, all the answers are yes about that. I have no idea how it works. We have a question in the back, sir. Yes, the idea, so the question is about how do you talk to Query Arrow. So the idea is that you don't have to change anything. It is the jQuery interface, but it will, and probably with some extensions and betterings, right? But yes, the idea is that your current code will work. It's just that now it will be behind yet another set of lies to be able to talk to other things, right? This is computer science. It's all about abstractions. Yeah, it's the same interface for now. Yes? For V5 API? Well, the V5 API will be when V5 comes out. But we have a working demo now, if you would like to play with it. I don't know where is it? Is it in your namespace, or is it? It's iRODS Contrib, okay. So, right. So you can talk to the V5 API as it is today on a 4 installation, and then you can kind of hone the software to talk to the V5 API, which is wrapped by the V4 API. If someone is in the Slack channel, maybe we can post a link to the Contrib repository. Anything else? I guess we might. Oh, there's one. Yes. So the question is about authentication protocols, if there's plans to support additional ones. We support many, and we support through CAS. We can support pretty much anything that CAS supports, as well as through PAM. So I guess it's CAS through PAM, is that right, Mike? No. Is it PAM through CAS?
Yeah.
Right. But yeah, the answer is yes, of course. If there's something that's interesting to you and you know, there's a use case, we'd love to hear it. We haven't heard one in a few years because things are plugins, and for the most part, people can figure out how to tie them in with the system they have. Is there something in particular that you're through SAML? Yes, I think we've seen an installation through SAML before.
Sure. So we, like at the rest layer where we want to talk about things like the law, what should, and so forth. Yes, we always have people doing that. We want to make that more.
Yeah. So we have seen deployments like that, but yes, bringing them closer to the server is always a goal to make it easier for for Mike as well as everybody else. But yes, if there's something that you need, we'd be happy to talk with you about it. There may already be a solution, even if it requires extra pieces in the middle. All right, I guess we might have to give Mike the actual microphone. Mike on the mic. All right, come on down. Jason's last slide. Who knows about the Slack channel? Let's see. If I hit refresh, the internet